All right, let me know if you get this right. Which photo is made with the Apple iPhone 15 Pro? Which one is made with the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra? And which one is made with a $7,000 Leica SL2? Lock in your answer, watch the video. You can change it throughout as you see some of this information, and at the end, I'll give you the answer. But this video is motivated by a number of things. One is me wanting to compare the Apple iPhone 15 Pro to the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Initially, that was the video I intended to make. I just wanted to share my perspective as a photographer and someone who stares at photos all day long and share what I liked and disliked about each camera when I compared them to one another. But I thought it'd be fun to take this one step farther and incorporate the camera that I use for all my professional work, the Leica SL2, and use it as a comparison with these two cameras to really see how close are these cameras to a professional camera. What kind of result can you get? And being honest with y'all, this is probably the most tedious video I've ever made on this YouTube channel. It was a lot more of an endeavor than I expected to make over 100 example photos, stare at them and analyze them and put my thoughts together. So if you enjoyed the video, do me a solid, hit the thumbs up button, and big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. But first, we have to talk about a comparison between the S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro. And the reason this comparison is important because both of these smartphone cameras are a little bit different than a mirrorless camera in the fact that they have software built into the device. And that right there highlights one of the nuances in a video like this where you're comparing smartphone cameras to something like a mirrorless camera. Smartphone cameras can be used like a professional tool and used in the exact same way as my Leica is, but they're not designed to be used like that all the time. These are also consumer products, so you have to treat them like their own thing before you compare them to something like the SL2. So the first test I did with these two phones was a simple Jpeg test, how anyone would take the camera out and just make a quick photo that they put on Instagram or social media or send to someone else. Now, in this comparison, I was really surprised because I liked the Samsung photos better. In my opinion, the JPEGs just looked a lot more natural. Sometimes iPhone photos have a tendency to look a little bit digital and unnatural, and I felt like that digital unnatural look was less prevalent with the Samsung S24 Ultra. I really liked the JPEG photos, and on top of that, you had the added resolution of 200 megapixels, which really beat out the iPhone in terms of resolution and detail. So I really liked that, especially when I was using the native camera. So after that, I did some testing of the raw capture capabilities when you're using the computational photography in these smartphones. And that right there is another example of a big difference between a smartphone camera and a mirrorless camera. A mirrorless camera is unable to process the shadows and the highlights and spit out this perfect HDR image like these two phones are capable of. And with each smartphone, there is a separate picture profile that makes the raw files readable by editing software. So you can essentially edit these HDR-like computational images. On the iPhone 15 Pro, that is Pro RAW, and on the Samsung S24, that is Expert RAW. And when you import either of these raw files into something like Adobe Lightroom, you have that picture profile applied so the image is readable. So when you compare these two raw files unedited with their proper picture profiles, one thing you'll notice is the Apple iPhone Pro RAW images look just a lot more contrasty. In my opinion, they did look a little bit better, but there were circumstances where the S24 Ultra looked better, where that contrast wasn't as welcome. So I don't think there was a huge difference between the two, but one thing I did notice that was a problem with the S24 Ultra is the fact that sometimes this computational HDR element to the raw files when you're using Expert RAW just didn't seem right. This photo in my kitchen is the best example of that. I set up this quick little scene, and as you can see, the shadows just seem a little too bright and unnatural in this image, whereas the Pro RAW photos from the iPhone look essentially perfect. And that would be my biggest takeaway, is that if you're using Expert RAW on the Samsung S24 Ultra, you really need to dial in all the settings and make sure that the photo you're exporting has all the elements you want applied to it. Now, speaking of all those options, when it comes to versatility and the user experience, I think I prefer the Samsung S24 Ultra as a photographer because you have so much control over your picture built natively into the camera app. On the iPhone, you really don't have that much control over what's going on in your image. You can't change your settings. There's no built-in ND filter. There's no control over your long exposure. Whereas with the Samsung, you have that ND filter option and you have control over your ISO and your shutter speed. If you're looking for more pro controls, I did have to give that win to the Samsung. Now, the final quick test I did comparing these two cameras was a portrait mode test, and the Samsung S24 Ultra blew this iPhone out of the water. The portrait mode on this camera is fantastic. I did 2 quick tests of this, and I felt like the final result straight out of the S24 Ultra was so much better than the iPhone. Everything from the highlights to the detail to the portrait bokeh effect itself just looked better on the Samsung. And one thing I got wrong in my initial video about the S24 Ultra was that this could do RAW files in portrait mode. Unfortunately, it can't. So when it comes to using either of these smartphones for more serious portraits, it's not something I would recommend. But if portrait mode is something you find yourself using from time to time, I have to say I liked the S24 much more. So at this point in the experiment, it felt like the Samsung was the better camera, but once I tested these against the Leica, everything became a lot more complicated. And before I talk about that, I want to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. So one really cool thing about smartphone photography is the fact that it's exposed so many people to the art of photography who otherwise might not have had access to it. And a lot of people I know who are making money with their photography now started with simply an iPhone. And if that's you and you have aspirations to take your photography to the next level, one of the easiest ways you can do that is with a professional looking website, and no one makes it easier than Squarespace. Squarespace is known for their award-winning templates that give creators like you and me the ability to make a beautiful looking website from scratch. And Squarespace actually made it even easier to build a website with their introduction of Fluid Engine, which allows you to drag and drop elements of your site around the page and create a custom look. And on top of that, Squarespace allows you to sell products and connect with your audience and potential clients with things like a contact me page and an e-commerce store. And Squarespace is making it easier than ever to monetize your photography with their introduction of courses. So if you have information that you think people find valuable, you can now offer that to people through Squarespace. And I have a bunch of videos on this channel where I break down a number of different strategies of how you can use your Squarespace site. I'll go ahead and link all those in the description down below. My personal favorite is a tutorial where I break down how to build a portfolio that looks just like the one I have on my site, evanramp.com. So if you're looking to take your business to the next level in 2024, head to the link in the description down below or go to squarespace.com/evanramp to start a free trial on Squarespace and use code EvanRamp when you sign up to save 10%. That's squarespace.com/EvanRamp to start a free trial. Follow one of those tutorials, and when you're ready to sign up, use code EvanRamp to save that 10% at checkout. Big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Now, like I mentioned, at this point, I was leaning towards the S24 Ultra as being the better camera in this test. But after comparing these two phones to the Leica SL2, I've come to realize that each one of these phones has a separate strength. Each one is good at one thing and each one is bad at one thing. So the reason I use the Leica SL2 as a comparison is essentially it acted as a control group in this experiment. So essentially by making pictures with the SL2, I now had something to compare these smartphone images to. And what I saw in these comparisons was that the S24 Ultra created better looking RAW files even when you remove that computational element of expert RAW. If you're using Pro mode, you get a strict DNG file, and honestly these RAW files out of camera looked better than the Leica SL2. They had a lot more color to them, they were a lot more lively, and I liked the way they looked. But one glaring issue with the S24 Ultra was this digital noise that you got in your images. This noise appeared as this almost magenta grain, and it was amplified in low light situations. But when you compare the photos from the S24 Ultra to the iPhone 15 Pro, the iPhone 15 Pro has RAW files that look much similar to the Leica SL2. In my opinion, the Apple RAW files edited much similar to the Leica SL2. They had a more professional feel to them. The files were much more malleable. They were easier to control versus the S24 Ultra. So I was kind of torn on this result because I loved the way the RAW files looked from the S24 Ultra in Pro mode, but I didn't like the way they edited. And with the Apple iPhone 15 Pro, I hated the way the RAW files looked because they look so digital when you zoom in on them. They don't have as much of a natural look compared to the Samsung, but they edit a lot better. So it's really difficult for me to say which one is necessarily better. It really lays in the eye of the person using the camera. If you're someone who is creating RAW files and are putting very subtle edits on the image, I might lean towards the Samsung. But if you're trying to put your smart
smartphone.
In the exact same scenario that you would have something like a professional camera in, I would probably lean towards the iPhone. And I say that because I'm that person who likes to get the best result possible from my smartphone, especially in situations where I might have an artistic opportunity and I don't have my mirrorless camera with me. And with that being said, that leads us to the answer to the question at the beginning of the video. The first photo is made with the Leica SL2, the second photo is made with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and the third photo is made with the S24 Ultra. None of these photos necessarily look bad, but it's pretty clear that the iPhone and the SL2 look much more similar to one another than the Samsung does. The iPhone delivers a result that is much closer to the professional result I'd get with a Leica. The biggest takeaway of this experiment is that there is no perfect answer. You know, sometimes having a mirrorless camera with you is not the best camera to have because you might be in a situation where you need a smartphone. You need something convenient. Some people might lean towards the iPhone 15 Pro because they want something to replace their mirrorless camera. Some people might only have one option and they want the best of everything, and they might go with the S24 Ultra. And in my opinion, the S24 Ultra is really the camera for everyone. 90% of people are probably going to love the result they can get with this smartphone, and maybe 10 or 20% of people are going to go with the iPhone strictly for its photo capabilities because they understand all the nuance and details that go into more creative and artistic photography. I think the people who strictly would want to use an iPhone are the people who are familiar with something like a professional camera. And that leads us into a completely different topic, which is recognizing that these are, at the end of the day, consumer products. Most people are not using these products for things like professional photography. Most people are not utilizing a test like this where they're breaking down all these raw files. Most people just want to make the best picture possible, and based on this test, I think most of those people would actually prefer the results you get with the S24 Ultra. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a guy who talks about this on the internet. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the thumbs up button and I will catch you in the next one. I think I want to do one more video with the S24 Ultra. I want to take it out to do some street photography, so let me know if you want to see that video. I'll catch y'all in the next one.